he said, "What the hell's that?" And the sergeant got to hear it, and he picked up, showed everybody that I'd been to Boots or W.H. Smith's and got a little notebook, unwaterproof, and it had it was like Watership Down. It had pictures of bunny rabbits on the front. And so I never heard the end of it. And, the Army's brilliant at giving you nicknames. And so from that moment on, I was referred to as Bunny.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Hill, and welcome to my brand new celebrity podcast, Schmoozing, where I take some of my favourite people and friends and put their careers and lives under the spotlight. Today's episode is brought to you by the fabulous people at 12A Studios, and sitting here in the studio with me is Mr. Jack Pallister. Hi, Jack.
Hi, David. How are you?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. How's your week?
It's been great, David. I've been writing a feature for Comic Relief that's appearing on the BBC Sounds app at the moment. It's a Brighton version of the smash hit Bridgerton called Brightington. So if you want to catch that, it's on the BBC Sounds app. It involves some famous faces and all the BBC Sussex and Surrey presenter lineup. So give it a little listen, and of course support Comic Relief.
So what you're telling me, Jack, is after 3 weeks of working with me on my humble podcast, Schmoozing, here at 12A Studios, you are now migrating your services to the BBC.
I know, I've hit the big time, David.
Well, we can only prepare our listeners for the fact that at some point soon you might be leaving us and heading to sunnier climes, Jack Pallister.
Very loyal to you, David.
So, what about our guest today? Because he's coming into the studio, which is very exciting.
He is coming into the studio, and I'm hopeful that he'll partake in some of this gin that we're about to pour. What have we got today, David?
Well, you can see here on my desk we have a full bottle of Brighton Gin, one of my favourites, and of course made here literally just down the road from the studios here in Hove. And today I've mixed it, I've kept it simple with an elderflower tonic from Fever Tree, and it is absolutely lovely. It's doing the trick, Jack.
I'm sure it is, and I'm sure that bottle won't be full for long.
Perhaps not today, but I shall give it my best shot.
Now, before we get to today's guest, I just want to remind all of our lovely listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, to rate and review and give us a cheeky subscribe.
So, Jack, whet our appetite with a teaser about today's podcast guest.
Well, David, today's guest is not only one of your good friends and your business coach, he's certainly one of the most interesting and inspiring people I've ever met. He's an entrepreneur, adventurer, mountain climber, Guinness World Record holder, motivational speaker, and as of late, a TV presenter. There is literally nothing this man can't do. It's Mr. Neil Laughton.
Thank you, Neil, for agreeing to be a guest on my podcast.
It's absolutely wonderful. David, thank you for inviting me. I am a little scared that you're going to be digging out some of my deepest, darkest, most fearful secrets.
Oh, I really hope so. We only have an hour, but I do want to try and understand where that can-do attitude comes from, and also some unique tips for inspiring people to push themselves beyond their own boundaries. Also, as one of your close friends, Neil, I want to take the opportunity to fill in some of my own knowledge gaps about you. So, sort of to kick off, for many high achievers, it all starts at school. So was this the case for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was the catalyst. Actually, my junior school years, 11, 12, 13, where I was actually bottom of class in pretty much everything. I really struggled. One could say that I was academically challenged. And I remember a careers tutor. In my day, we would parents would pay for one of these assessments to ascertain what you're most suited to do later in life as a job, as a career. And this careers tutor came in and said, "You ought to be a banker." And I said, "That's the last thing I want to do as a banker." But I wasn't, I was 12 years old. I couldn't say no. But anyway, we both agreed, 6-month review that banking wasn't going to be for me when I managed to score U grade, an ungraded score in maths GCSE. So that was the first thing. And then I had a great geography teacher I really admired and liked. But he produced, Mr. Robertson produced a report which said that I was last in class and last in the exams, etc. But he'd added a handwritten note which said, and I quote, "Neil is trying very hard but achieving very little," which was really depressing, actually, and particularly from my perspective, where geography actually was my best subject.
But I mean, people that know you now, like I've known you probably, for the best part of 5 years. We just can't almost compute that someone like you would be sort of academically challenged. I mean, if someone meets you for the first time, they would say, here is someone highly intelligent, highly accomplished, articulate, has been around the world, very experienced. I mean, it almost doesn't kind of add up.
Well, that's kind. I think probably the truth is I was a slow learner, slow developer, and we're all different. And so where I lacked, I think, in academia and the aspirations to be academic. And I think, again, it comes down to motivation. I was negative. I messed around in class, and therefore I didn't get the exam grades that I perhaps needed to. But eventually, when I had an aspirational dream, you may or may not know, from the age of 12, I decided that I want to be a Royal Marine. And so I had a goal, and then that focused my mind. I then had something to aspire to. And eventually I did, on the third attempt, pass maths GCSE, which one needed as a commission into the Royal Marines. But I do think, where I wasn't academic, everyone's got something that they can excel at, I believe. And for me, it was kind of just being adventurous.
So I'm going to explain at this moment in time to our listeners that your young son is actually here in the studio. He's wearing a set of cans. He's listening to the podcast. And obviously he's in the course of his education, be it that it's been somewhat disrupted by COVID. I just wondered, having heard about your own sort of school life, how you contextualise that for your son, because I'm guessing that you're very keen that he does very well academically.
I'm really keen that he finds his passion, and he has a passion, actually, as you well know. He might well be following down your footsteps, David, in on the stage. He's extremely talented. He has won a senior school scholarship for drama, and so that might well end up being his passion, in which case, great. Frankly, you don't need a double A star in maths for drama. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, absolutely. And I think actually it's interesting, when I was reading some of the information and background about you, I mean, I did okay academically, but maths was never my subject. So we share that in common.
What's more important for me is that he grows up to be a fine young standing gentleman that treats people well with respect, can look you in the eye, give you a proper firm handshake, and do the right things. And as long as he follows his passions, I really don't mind whether he is a dustman or a banker or on stage in the West End.
Oh, well, that's I think that's a great, from his point of view, that's such a great philosophy that you've got with your children. Now, rumour has it, Mr. Laughton, that you were actually expelled from school.
Oh, how did you discover that? Yes, especially with my 13-year-old son behind me with the cans on. I perhaps shouldn't tell you this story, but I used to run the school tuck shop, the sweet shop, and used to get into a little bit of mischief. Yes, I sold sweets to all the kids, but in the back, I was making illegal alcohol from the sugar and adding yeast and all the rest. And at some point, age 16, I organised the most enormous rave, and in the sort of junior sixth or whatever, we were slightly separated from the main school. I thought I'd get away with this incredible rave, music, lights, dancing, alcohol, homemade, and unfortunately we didn't. Half the school of my year were staggering back to bed at 3 a.m, and obviously somebody squealed or somebody got caught. Hadn't done the Army's resistance to interrogation course, and so quickly the following morning I was hauled up in front of the headmaster In those days, corporal punishment was rife at boarding school. I had to lower my trousers, and I was given 8 lashings of the cane and expelled for the remainder of term.
So your own father was a captain in the Royal Navy, wasn't he? I mean,
he wasn't too amused.
I was going to say, what was his reaction?
Well, I think he was pretty underneath. He was furious, but I don't recall being thrashed at home. To be honest, I'd had the thrashing. I think he realised it. You know, that I knew that it was a poor judgment of error of judgment, and you know, luckily the headmaster in the school gave me a second chance. And in fact, funnily enough, what they did, very clever, and it reminds me of the story of Shackleton, when his most difficult man on that expedition in Antarctica in 1916-18, he took with him on that arduous journey across the Southern Ocean. And the comparison was getting me back into school and appointing me a school prefect and head of house, which transformed, I think, my prospects, because I wasn't just the naughty kid. I now had responsibility, and actually that's what I needed. I needed that responsibility to turn the corner.
Yeah, and you could say as well that you know, in terms of your alcohol making antics, I mean, you were showing signs of being an entrepreneur there, weren't you? I mean, clearly.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, absolutely. So you finish school. What happens next?
Well, I do get into the Marines, but sadly my father passed away after a struggle with cancer of the throat, which was very... It was a tough time. I was right in the middle of commando course, and you know, I managed to pass the course, but ultimately my headspace wasn't in the right place. And you know, when you're in you know, place of commanding 30 Royal Marine Commandos as a young officer, and you're a bit distracted, you're unfocused, you're grieving. I wasn't at my best, and you know, I was shown the door, sadly, and you know, it was a tough couple of years recovering from that failure. I escaped to London with hardly a penny in my pocket, and ended up doing selling office equipment and stationery off the back of a cart, literally, freelance, commission only, door-to-door selling for a couple of years just to sort myself out. And then, yeah, I mean, if I can tell you what happened, I you know, my military career was still, in my mind, unfinished, and I had still things I wanted to achieve and do within that environment. And so I signed up for a Special Forces regiment, which as an Army reservist. And that was hugely challenging, but again, gave me a great focus to, you know, to look towards.
I just want to go back slightly while you were in the Marines, because for me personally, and you know me well enough now to know that any type of military training would fill me with some form of terror and horror. So I just wonder what that military training is like, you know, just to give an insight into it.
Yeah, so it on the one hand it's quite tough, but actually if you prepare yourself, you know, I got super fit before joining the Marines and you know, the Army Reserve Regiment, and but you know, it is a brutal shock. For example, you know, there's a sort of tradition where as the junior officers, about 3 or 4 days in, you suddenly get you know, woken abruptly at 3-4 in the morning, and you're having to do, you know, a 3 or 4 hour mud run in the estuary of the Exe, the local river, and it's absolutely torturous, hideous experience. But it's a tradition, and the senior officer batch gets the privilege of beasting, as they used to say, the junior batch. And then when it was my turn and my fellows were distilling the punishment, we woke all the junior officers up, smashed their doors in, dragged them out of bed, and my colleague next door cabin was dragging a young officer out, and he heard the immortal words, "I suggest you put His Royal Highness down, sir." And it was the bodyguard of Prince Edward who'd come to do the commando course.
Really?
Being dragged by the scruff of his neck out on this mud run, and his personal protection officer obviously had a Walter PPK and was prepared to use it. Wasn't expecting the 3 a.m. Bee sting. So Prince Edward got away with it.
So he didn't do it?
No.
And he didn't find the Royal Marines very comfortable, did he? I've seen documentaries where he's spoken about the fact that he didn't really, it wasn't for him, shall we say.
No, and I think he was slightly forced into it from a parental perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to sit next to him at lunch in the mess, and he'd order his ginger beer and would just look miserable. And I pitied him. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But horses for courses. Yeah.
And then you said you moved into the SAS, and even I know that the selection process for that is pretty tough. I mean, how was that?
Yeah, it was pretty tough. One of the hardest things I've had to do. But like anything, I think if you put your mind to it, anything's possible. The kind of secrets that I can share with you is that you have to be a grey man. You can't be. I mean, you might struggle, David, because you're flamboyant. You're a star, and actually they're not looking for stars. They're looking for the
really, Neil.
Yeah, they're looking for the grey man, somebody who's gonna be a team player. But I knew one thing: you had to be super fit. So I did in the 6 months leading up to the selection process. I ran 14 miles every work day. And I think, again, maths is not my strong point, but I do believe that equates to about 60 marathons in 6 months. And when I walked through the gates for the first day of selection, I was one of the fittest, and that certainly helped.
Wow. Yeah, I bet it did. And you sort of get into the SAS. So what was your first exercise?
The first exercise was a kind of an exercise down in Wales, and we had to first of all line up to make sure, and the sergeant would shout out, show us your sleeping bag, and you dig your sleeping bag out of your rucksack into the air, show us your wet waterproofs, and then the cry would go, show us your penknife. And so I'd dig out my Swiss Army knife, and a little grizzly 5'5", tough-looking little geezer next to me. I had no idea who he was. Apparently he'd been in the French Foreign Legion. He growled at me. He said, "Call that a knife?" And he pulled out this most massive, 1 foot long, sharp-looking, cutlass. And so it took all sorts. And then I had the slight misfortune of we were on the transport going down to the Welsh mountains for this first exercise. And the sergeant again was about to brief us as to what the night exercise was going to be, how many kilometres we'd have to hike over the mountains, and in preparation for that, for the first checkpoint, he said, "Get out your waterproof, pens and notebook." So there I was next to a good pal of mine, Skippy, who got out his green camouflage, night vision torch and his Chinograph waterproof pencils. And he took one look at me in disdain. He said, "What the hell's that?" And the sergeant got to hear it, and he picked up, showed everybody that I'd been to Boots or WH Smith's and got a little notebook, unwaterproof, and it had it was like Watership Down. It had pictures of bunny rabbits on the front. And so I never heard the end of it. And the army's brilliant at giving you nicknames, and so from that moment on, I was referred to as Bunny.
As Bunny, can't quite imagine you being referred to as Bunny, Neil. Did you do their famous demolitions and explosives course that's the SAS is kind of well known for?
Yeah, I did actually. That was one of the highlights. I remember, thinking, "Oh, this is great. I'm being paid to make bombs." And sadly, the instructor I heard the other day had just literally passed away. It was very sad. He was a right old character. But I remember going to Hereford and doing this course, and it was just fantastic. The first thing that happened, we went into a classroom, and there was a sort of typical sort of classroom briefing. And then about 10 minutes in, the instructor asked one of my candidate friends, could you pass that book of explosives in the corner? So he literally picked it off the desk, and as he picked it up, let off this sort of mini explosion. So that caught our attention, and so it went on from there. And you just literally go into a shed, pick a bundle of P4 explosive, be taught how to put the detonator in and then go off to an old disused building to blow it up. And it was fabulous. Being a little on the naughty side, I took on one occasion slightly more P4 explosive than I should have done. And I blew this building in one go. I mean, a ginormous explosion. And then there was all hell to pay because an old lady 5 miles down outside of the range had her kitchen ceiling fall in on her as a result of my slightly optimistic sized bomb. So, there's all sorts of shenanigans that go on.
And did you get into trouble for that?
Yeah, slightly.
Yes. I just wondered, fast forward to now, I just wondered what kind of skills and values you still use from that time in the SAS or the military in general.
Yeah, I think the values and the commando spirit are things like courage. They are, the four principles that the founder of the SAS, Colonel David Stirling, espoused were, number one, the unrelenting pursuit of excellence, self-discipline, humility, and humour. And things like the Royal Marine equivalent is cheerfulness in the face of adversity. And so it's all those kind of, strong principles that, make the military and military personnel what they are, and, valued members of society, and indeed when they retire into business.
So how long did you do in the SAS in total? How long were you in for?
Don't forget it was a reserve regiment, but I served for 12 years.
Wow, a long time. So when you left the regiment, what was the next step for you?
To continue developing a commercial career, just to become, and business and commerce for me wasn't the be-all and end-all, but it was a means to an end. And so, my passion, as you probably know, is more travel, sport, adventure, and, business was just a means to be able to fund that passion.
Yeah. I just want to touch on your business career for a second. And I was doing some research this week around it and actually, discovered things I didn't know. For example, I didn't really know about the business that you set up and then ultimately sold. And I think for many of us, myself included, running businesses, the end goal would be that, at some point, someone comes along, offers you a life-changing amount of money, and you sell your business, and then you move on to the next chapter of your life. When you started Office Projects Group with Andrew Russell in 1994, was that your strategic plan?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think probably I didn't believe that I had the skill set to develop a hugely successful business. I knew, and that's why I invited Andrew, who was a colleague from a previous employed position, to join me in the endeavour, because I didn't have the confidence, the skill set, or the wherewithal, if you like, the psychological requirements to be able to, I think, succeed in running my own business. So it was a bit of a coward's way out, if that's the right word. I knew that I needed to generate an income. And that's really what drove it, and the passion and the purpose for the reasons behind it. I didn't really have a huge aspiration to create an Amazon or anything else. It was just being able to survive more than anything else.
But that said, we've got to put this in the sort of the context of time, because we are going back to, you started the business in 1994. And you ran that business, I think, for just shy of 20 years. I think about 17, 18 years from what I read online. But 2/3 of the way through that journey, you had built that business up to a business with a turnover of over £40 million, which I would say by today's standards is a lot of money for a business that you've started from scratch. So I was kind of interested in an insight into how you you went from 0 to £40 million plus turnover.
Yeah. So, okay, the first thing I think you need to know is that the entrepreneurial side, the starting of that business was a result of really failing in the employed space. So I had 3 employed positions. They all, for one reason or another, ended up a bit like my marine career, on the coals. And so I was kind of almost forced into backing myself with the support of Andrew, who played an integral role in the success of that business. We literally started, with nothing. There was no business. There was a plan. There was an acceptance that we were risking pretty much everything. We put in £2,000 each into the pot and bought some computers and printed stationery, and then just started trading. And I remember the first deal we struck was with a publishing company in Marylebone. 2 weekends work, printed an invoice for 7,200 plus VAT. And that sustained us for the first couple of months. And then from there, it just grew on organically. We weren't clever enough to be doing, clever acquisition deals or anything. It was just purely an commercial interiors, design, build furniture, trading business and project management firm. And the course of 15, 17 years, we built it up, literally, every single month, quarter, year was reasonable growth, and we just kept building and building. We had a few stumbles. I remember one horrible client who took us for a ride, and we had to suffer a £240,000 bad debt, which was gut wrenching, frankly. And how we dealt with that was actually an interesting lesson in entrepreneurship. And at that point, we were probably 15 million turnover, and sustaining £250,000 bad debt was not insignificant, and we were certainly at risk. But I thought about it, and then it was almost the catalyst to the next stage of the development to 30 and then 40 million. And I'll tell you why. Because where some might shrink and hold back and be reserved, I think my adventurous spirit took us to the next level. And I simply said to the team, look, we've been doing up to £250,000, £500,000 max projects, but actually I realised that a £5 million project, you needed the same resources, the same skill set. It's just larger number of walls, partitions, carpets, desks, and so forth. And we just simply changed our strategy from servicing £500,000 projects to multi-million-pound projects, and that was the difference.
Which clearly shot up the turnover.
Correct.
Yeah. No, interesting. Really fascinating. I couldn't find much online about your old business partner. Do you still see him?
Yes, we keep in touch. One of the things about choosing a business partner, I think, is really important. You have to be different. And we were. We didn't have the same circumstances. He's a few years younger. He started family 10 years younger, so had all of that. And so there was a nice synergy in terms of, being able to commit to long periods of time. When I was off climbing Everest, he was, going home, to change nappies and so forth. And so it kind of worked from that perspective. He was very much, a lad's lad, and would be down the boozer Friday night with his mates. That wasn't my lifestyle. And so that difference of character and personality and, business sense actually, I think, helped us grow the wide-ranging team that we had.
I'm intrigued to know, when you set up the business, obviously, I think you've just explained you were sort of equal partners. You put the equal amount of money in. But you read anything about that company, it clearly states that he was the commercial director and you were the chairman. How was that decided?
I think it was a natural progression. I mean, in the early days, we did everything. We both sold, we both built, we both did the pitches, the meetings, held the the management team meetings. You lick the stamps on the envelope. But over numbers of benchmark periods of time where you're at 5 million turnover, then you're at 15 million turnover. You have to change into a different role. And over the course of 17 years, we had lots of different roles. He was always the builder of the relationship, and I was, if you like, the front man, digging out the opportunities and doing the sales side. But it kind of worked. But it wasn't perfect, and I'll share one quick story for you because it's a bit shocking. One of the great things, we trusted each other absolutely 100%. The differences were there, characters and all the rest of it, and differences of opinion. But at the end of the day, we trusted each other, and that was the core reason for the success of the relationship and the business. But we had our interesting moments. I remember particularly stressful time, probably early 2000s. We had a major disagreement over something. I won't bore you with the details, but I suggested that we go for a run around the bridge. We were in London, a London firm, South London, Putney, and I suggested we go for a run and whilst jogging around the bridges, try and sort out our differences. And then towards coming back in from Richmond, Andrew said something that just inflamed me, and so I turned around and punched him in the face. And a few seconds later, the two grown men scrabbling like wrestlers and punching each other whilst joggers and dog walkers were walking by, and we were having a right old Barney in the mud, quite close to Putney Bridge. So it wasn't perfect, and we just needed at that moment to let it out and let our feelings go, and we did. And then 2 minutes later, we were handshaking and going, right, glad that's over. Now, what are we going to do about your black eye? How are we going to tell the troops? I swung quite well and given him an immediate black eye. So we made up a story that he'd accidentally jogged into a tree branch. I'm not sure anyone believed it, but there we are.
And did you find that I mean, in terms of having that, let's say physical contact, that sort of fight, I mean, did that sort of make a difference positively ultimately? Yeah,
it released the tension, and he then knew that he couldn't get away with slagging me off like he had, because there would be consequences, and therefore it was a good way. It was a sort of, at the time, it was a manly way to resolve your differences. I think maybe not work quite so well today.
So you've set up this business. You've done very, very well. You've had organic growth. You've had strategic growth. You've got the business to over 40 million turnover. You've employed a lot more people. And then you get to that moment in the story where this very big construction company, and I hope I'm going to pronounce this right, Balfour Beatty. Have I got that right, Neil?
You have, yeah. They're the largest contractor in the land.
Yeah. So they come along, this big beast of a construction business, offer you both millions of pounds to sell the business, and you sell the business. I'm just interested to know, you've sold the business now. The deal has been done. The money is now in your account. What was the first thing you did with the money? I mean, did you do anything sort of rash or impulsive with the money to begin with? Did you go out and buy a fast car? Did you? I'm just interested to know what you do when that moment happens.
No, it was a strange time. Obviously, we had agreed a strategy to sell the business, and in fact, that part is the interesting bit. I think, not necessarily the putting in the money back. I quickly answer your question. No, I didn't go out and buy a Ferrari because I think money, being flash is one thing, but being overly flash is not great. In fact, I was in the middle of delivering. I was chief leader for a charity called British Exploring Society, and we, at that moment of the sale, I had to depart my duties as chief leader on an expedition with 60 disadvantaged kids, and we'd done a trekking trip in Norway, and we'd sailing back in a tall ship that I'd hired, and we'd just arrived at Tilbury Docks. I'd left them to it. We were about to sail under Tower Bridge a couple of days' time, and I had to scoot into London to sign on the dotted with the lawyers, and literally, that afternoon, 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon, there was a couple of glasses of champagne. Andrew went off and probably did go and buy a fast car Bentley, I think he bought. And I literally, it was great, had a few zeros in the bank account, but I went straight back to the tool ship to, 60 disadvantaged kids who knew none the wiser, of course. When I'd left them, I was a pauper, and when I came back to them 2 days later, I was a multimillionaire. But that didn't really matter. What was mattering, what I was doing at that moment in time, and that was helping the prospects of these young kids.
Yeah.
Making the decision to sell was actually an interesting one, because this is about 2010, and we won a bid for a £20 million project at Heathrow Airport, and every construction company in the land, every interiors refurbishment contractor in the land had bid for it, and the top 46 were shortlisted, and ultimately my business won the project, and we delivered it. And it was at that point that Balfour Beatty, the largest contractor, as you've rightly identified, literally came knocking on the door saying, and I think their words were, "You're creating too many ripples in our pond. We'd like to buy you." So I said, fine, make us an offer.
This podcast has very much a sort of celebrity theme running through it.
Not sure why I'm here then.
Yourself included. But I just would like to dive into now at this stage your relationship with Bear Grylls.
For what reason?
Well, I just think it's an interesting relationship, because I can see the similarities, but I'm just keen to know, how did you meet, and then some of the things you've done together. Interestingly, I mentioned to Jack earlier, I was watching some clips of your video, and there's a young Bear Grylls on one of your Everest expeditions. There's even a scene of you which looks like you're in bed together in a tent, Neil, which caught my attraction for all the wrong reasons. I just wanted to understand, where this relationship kind of originates from, and the things you've done together.
So I'm about 11 years older than Bear, and I was at the time his senior officer in the army, and he requested a meeting, and so I said, of course, yeah, come in and have a chat. And he had found out that I was organising my second attempt at climbing Everest for an expedition back in 1998. And this young, private soldier, Grylls, spotty-faced youth of 22, wanted to be on my team. And so he pretty much, begged for me to invite him onto the team. I said, well, have you got any climbing experience, Grylls? And he said, no, sir, but tell me what I should do. So I said, well, what you need to do is go and climb a 6,000-7,000 meter peak in Nepal, and then come back and tell me when you have, and I'll consider your application. And off he went to climb Amer de Blam, one of the pretty tough peaks within the Everest region. Came back to me, and I said, okay, you can join my team. And off we went to Everest in 98, and it ended up, I had an interesting climb, and me and young Bear Grylls summited the mountain together. You
have done 6, I believe, expeditions to Mt Everest, so I'm kind of interested to know what the mountain represents to you and why you keep going back.
Yeah, Everest has a definite draw for me. It's the mistress in my life, and for sure. Originally, I hadn't got an aspiration to climb Everest. I think it probably would have come, but the catalyst was actually setting a challenge, which, Everest wasn't at the fore. It was actually a thing called the Seven Summits, which, when I was on a mountain quite by accident in South America, in fact, I was just sort of having a travel trekking holiday, and a friend invited me to join him on a trip to the highest peak in South America, Aconcagua. I said, I'd trek in, thank you very much. I'd trek into base camp. When I got to base camp, people weren't feeling too good, and I was feeling good, and I carried on up the mountain, and then unfortunately my friend got sick, and so I acquired all his kit and ended up climbing to the top. Only 2 out of 8 people to do it, and that set off. And at the same time, I was reading this book called Seven Summits, the highest peak on each continent. And I thought that would be a great challenge to offset the 9-to-5 office projects existence that I had in London. And of course, Everest is one of the 7 summits, so it just obviously ended up on my list to do. And climbing mountains has just become part of my life. I enjoy the challenge, the physicality of it, and Everest is, once you go there, it's just an iconic peak. And so two attempts to climb the mountain, another expedition taking a friend in a wheelchair to the highest spot somebody's ever been in a wheelchair. Then we did a trip again with Bear in 2007, which was a flying trip to get the world record for the highest powered parachute ascent, flying over Everest. And then 2 attempts to get the world's highest black tie dinner party on Everest, which succeeded on the 2nd attempt in 2018.
And you have summited twice?
Well, I've been quite high a few times, but summited once with Bear in May 1998.
And for anybody that knows anything about Everest, as you get closer to the summit and you go into what they call the death zone, you get to this section called Hillary Step, don't you? Famously, quite a tricky part of the ascent. I've probably watched every YouTube video and every documentary there is about that section of the climb, because it looks, to me personally, it looks terrifying. And so there's some kind of obsession about watching people do what almost looks impossible to me. But I'm really interested to know, what's going through your head when you are at that stage, that high, in the death zone. So your body is naturally sort of closing down, and if you were up there too long, you would die. I mean, it's as simple as that. I mean, what's going through your mind at that point, Neil?
Well, the first thing you have to appreciate is, because of the lack of oxygen pressure at the Hillary Step, it's estimated that it's 11% rather than 21% oxygen pressure. So actually, I don't think in many respects your brain is working particularly well at all. And that therein lies, one reason for the 300 odd people who have lost their lives climbing Everest. When I was doing it, the stats were for every 6 people that summited, 1 would die. That was the percentage chance of fatality. Not great. But for me, it was just excitement. The hard work had been done. We'd had a couple of summit bids which had gone wrong with weather, and one of my partners, Mick, had taken a fall quite high up on the mountain, and I had to sort out a rescue, but had one final chance, and that was with young Bear Grylls. I was pretty tired after the 7 previous weeks and the full summit bid a few days prior, and it was just, you heard the expression summit fever. When you're at the Hillary Step, yes, it's steep and it's pretty harsh and a little bit dangerous, but at that point you don't care. You can smell the summit, and I smelt the summit, and there was nothing that was going to stop me from getting there.
I'm really interested to know what your opinions are on the current state of Everest, because obviously there's lots of news reporting now as the world has got wealthier and there are more people enjoying let's say a higher level of wealth, and then they can afford actually to do what is quite an expensive thing. I think, an average cost of around £50,000 to train and then to be able to try and attempt the summit of Everest. We're now seeing a world where there are traffic jams on the summit. I mean, in terms of Hillary Step, just lines and lines and lines of climbers, which has got to be really dangerous because it slows up the process and then leaves you on the mountain longer. So I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, look, it's a difficult situation. You've assessed it perfectly sensibly, And yes, I think the Chinese and the Nepalese governments do recognise the dangers, but of course they want to, they want to make as much money from tourism and climbing and permit fees as they possibly can, and arguably to get away with it. I think we humans have to just take good decisions as at the time, and those queues are absolutely horrifically dangerous because of the altitude, because of the weather conditions. If you stand around for more than a minute, you start to freeze. Your body starts to freeze, and it's just not a good place to be standing still. What can be done? Yes, they're bringing in rules and regulations to try and make sure people have experience. I think a lot of the problems is that for many people, Everest is their first flipping mountain, which is ridiculous. It's not the most technical mountain to climb, but it's certainly a tough one. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done. And you really shouldn't be doing it if it's your first mountain. That's the first thing. I want access. I wouldn't want it to be, with 6 expeditions to Everest under my belt. I'm the last person to say, you, David Hill, should not be going to Everest. That's not what I'm saying. But get your alpine experience. Incidentally, if anyone out there does want to climb it, talk to me, because I can offer you a much better deal than 50 grand. That's the top end price that you're paying for a fully, expensive guided expedition. But there are better ways to do it, and less expensive ways to do it.
And if people do want to take you up on that, anybody listening to the podcast, they can access you through your website, can't they? Which is neillawton.com.
Something like that. Yeah. Neil@neillawton.com.
Yeah. So if anybody's listening out there that wants to do Everest, or certainly wants to embark on, a career in climbing, then I can say you're certainly would be my recommendation of someone to go and talk to, because we're talking about Everest, but actually you've climbed a lot more mountains than just Everest. I don't want to move off the mountain. I want to stay on the mountain for a second, because I'd be right in saying that you had a very near-death experience on Everest, didn't you?
Yeah, my first attempt was back in '96, a long time ago now. But of course, with every disaster, you remember it like it was yesterday. And I was an experienced climber, but I hadn't been above 8,000 meters, and as you rightly say, above the death zone. And as I climbed up to the last campsite before summiting the mountain back in 10th of May 1996, a kind of expected storm arrived early. And as I arrived at the South Col, Camp 4, 26,000 feet or 8,000 meters, the last campsite, this maelstrom arrived early. And unfortunately, 30-odd climbers were still making their way down from the summit from the earlier part of the day. And it was just at the time the worst disaster to strike Everest and the mountain. And I got caught for 2 days and 2 nights at above 8,000 meters, where, as you say, your body is literally disintegrating. You can't survive at that altitude. Yes, we had some bottled oxygen to suck on occasionally, but it was tough times. And of course, people were losing their lives, being blown off the mountain, freezing to death, and having heart attacks around us. So it was really a tough time. The Tibetan government described it later as the worst storm in 100 years.
How did you mentally survive that? Because as you just alluded to, and I've read and also listened to other interviews you've given about that experience. I mean, just to explain it very, very clearly to people, your fellow climbers are dying around you during that period. What's your survival mechanism, your coping mechanism for that?
I think it's just a survival instinct. And I think, having been in a few scenarios where, the wrong flick of the coin takes you down a very dark and permanently dark path, I think it's just being able to accept the situation that you find yourself in. Try not to panic. Make rapid assessment of the best course of action or actions that you need to do to give yourself the best chance of survival. And I think being able to have that clarity of thought, calmness of your attitude. And I think another thing that works really, really well is if you are fortunate enough to be in a leadership position, you've got plenty of responsibility to be able to not think about yourself and how dangerous the situation you're currently in, and whether you might not lose your life, but actually you've got something to focus your attention to try and help others, which I think is a great privilege, and should be dealt as such from a leadership perspective.
When you were on the mountain over those 2 days, were there times where you literally believed you were going to lose your life? You thought, this is it, I'm going to finish up here on this mountain?
I didn't dwell. I think instinctively thought that might be a possibility. We had to go out in the middle of the night to make sure that the tent was still secured with heavy rocks, with our guy ropes. Tents further down the mountain that were unoccupied. I've got pictures which shows them absolutely destroyed, flattened in the conditions, and that was 3,000 feet below us. So we were right in the middle of a horrendous, storm at 8,000 meters on Everest. It doesn't get much worse. But having said that, until the point that you're blown off the mountain, you're still alive. So you make best of it and try and, like I said before, make good decisions and keep calm.
And it certainly didn't put you off going back up, did it?
No, there must be something wrong with me, I suppose.
Before we end the interview, I've got a few quick fire questions for you, Neil. Before we take you through the green door, just interested, what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of getting into and serving with Her Majesty's Special Forces Regiment, of climbing Everest, and I think marrying a wonderful lady called Caroline and producing 3 fabulous kids.
I just wondered it's difficult to kind of narrow it into three top tips, but 3 top tips for success.
Yeah, so, when I put a project together, and I think this relates to an adventure or probably a business, but for me, the 3 key things that are really important, I class myself as the mastermind of the mission. So the safe delivery of the vision and the execution of the plan. Number 1. Number 2, basically team tactician. So you're getting the best people that you can on board for your project, your business, or your adventure. But then, of course, as a leader, one has to manage that team and put them to good use and not micromanage and all the good leadership stuff. So team tactician, number 2. And 3, facilitator of fun. If people aren't having fun, they aren't enjoying their existence or that project or, what they're having to do, then it's not going to be easy. So if you can, make sure that everyone is enjoying the journey, then so much the better. And those would be my 3 top tips.
Brilliant. Just wondered, we're in lockdown 3, as we've already spoken about, but what's in store for you 2021?
Well, hopefully the new year will start off with a bang in May or so. My big project, I've got a couple of fun projects, adventure projects. I've got some clients who want to come with me to the Amazon, and we're going to take some paddleboards and do an amazing adventure and learn about life in the Amazon jungle and on the river. And that's hopefully in May or June, if we're allowed. And then the big plan is another trip to Nepal and the Himalayas, and I've got this little idea to set a new record for the highest bike ride.
So just to rewind, you're going to the Himalayas and you're intending to ride a bike on some of these mountains.
Well, as you know, I'm a penny farthing rider, but your listeners will be pleased to know I'm not taking a penny farthing to the 95th highest mountain in the world. I'm going with ordinary mountain bikes, and I'm taking a party to ride into the 95th highest mountain in West Nepal, a fairly unknown peak. Done a bit of research on it. I do believe it's rideable from the summit, and if we succeed in climbing said mountain in September, October, raising money for the Star Trust, disadvantaged kids again, we will be setting a new Guinness World Record for the highest cycle ride in the world, beating 2 Germans who currently hold the record.
Well, if anybody can do that, it will be Neil Laughton and co. At this stage in your life, with so many achievements under your belt, do you have any other ambitions?
Well, I'm reaching a certain stage in life where, the doctors are calling slightly more regularly than they used to. So I'm just hoping that I'm going to live long enough to see my children down the aisle and happily settled into young adult life before I fall off the old perch. That's, one slightly more ballistic ambition. But no, I treat every day as it comes. I try and, help others from a business perspective and, a life perspective as well. And I think if people can be generally a little more adventurous than they currently are, they'll be in a good place. So my mission and hope is that I can help as many people as I can, have a slightly more adventurous life one way or another.
Now, we did mention earlier that we have his son in the studio. He's brought his son along. He's been listening in. He's had the cans on. And I just thought it was too good an opportunity to miss. So welcome to the studio, Oscar.
Hi, David.
So we've just heard, obviously, about Neil, and he's certainly had a very colourful career. He's done a lot. He's achieved a lot. But you have a very unique perspective because you're his only son. And I just wondered what your thoughts are about your dad at this stage in your life.
Well, he's always pushing me to do like the best I can, whatever I'm doing. So, for example, I love rugby, and he's a big rugby fan as well. So I remember when we were doing rugby last year, he was always at my games and cheering me on and like being really helpful, like that. So
you'd say he was a supportive dad.
Yeah, very supportive.
And what about your aspirations to be an actor and maybe sort of enter into the performing arts business like I did? I mean, that's very different to the type of life and career and the type of thing that your dad did. But I mean, is he supportive of that?
Yeah. Well, like I said, he's always, whatever I want to do, he's saying you should do that. Like, I just think acting is something that I really want to do, and I find like I've always had a passion for that. So whatever I have as a passion, he wants that for me.
And that's a pretty cool dad, really, Oscar, isn't it?
Yeah.
But he must have some annoying qualities. Come on, dish the dirt.
Well, to be honest, he doesn't really have that many annoying characters. Apart from just really wanting me to do the best I can, as in like maybe sometimes if I'm on the Xbox too long or I'm watching Netflix and he'll want me to do something, or like we'll go and we'll do a workout or something, and that if I'm just having a chill day, then I kind of want to be just left alone. But it's all just to help me. So
those sort of dad moments are, you can excuse them for, he's just got your best interests at heart.
Yeah.
And what about your sisters? Because you've got 2 sisters. If they were sat here and I was asking them, what's the most annoying quality about your dad? What do you think they would say?
I think they'd probably say about the same thing with them. Like, he's always trying to help them with their dancing and like just playing around with them, having fun.
Well, we never mentioned Neil's dancing, actually, and it's an interesting point that you just made, because as I often do with Neil and your mum Caroline, we end up at the same functions in Brighton and going to the same charity balls and gala events, and I can remember the first time I saw them dance, and it was quite remarkable. They are, I mean, your mum was a professional dancer anyway, but I had no idea that your dad could sort of dance and jive like he can. He's pretty hot on the dance floor.
Well, I had no idea about that, but it's the first time I'm hearing of him being a good dancer.
You have to see your mum and dad do a rock and roll jive, Oscar, because I'm You're going to be very, very shocked, like I was and Lucas was. It was one of those moments where you think, is there anything this man can't do? Now he's actually, he's number one on the dance floor. But listen, thank you so much we put you on the spot, getting you to come on and actually answer a couple of questions. Hope you've enjoyed the show. The final part of our show today, Neil, is a feature that we started with the start of the podcast, whereby, I've started a story, and then each of our guests along the way are contributing to that story. So just to summarise the story so far, Henry has inherited the old manor from his recently deceased father, and he's just discovered the key to the green door in the attic that has always remained locked. It's his father's wake, and I'm going to pick it up from Jill Nalder's beautifully written paragraph, and then hopefully you're going to take over, Neil. So I'm going to get in my sort of theatrical head zone and go for it. He walked over to a tall, dark-haired and gothic-looking woman, his sister Bella. She was holding hands with her equally imposing lover Donna. He greeted them and mumbled his rather lame excuse about a headache. In her icy glare, he could feel his siblings' deep-rooted resentment. Toddy, his brother, the baby of the family, was as usual drinking whiskey and entertaining the crowd. Henry passed him by, ignored him, and walked briskly towards the stairs. His heart was racing now. Such was his excitement, the key seemed to be burning a hole in his pocket. He began climbing the stairs. First floor, second floor, breathless. He arrived. The third floor. There it was, the attic. The green door. Weirdly, a fleeting sense of foreboding clutched his heart. Just then he heard footsteps on the wooden stairs. Stilettos. He heard hushed voices. Shit! Had Bella and Donna followed him? He tried frantically to turn the key in the lock. Too stiff. He turned around. A look of horror crossed his face.
How could she possibly be standing there? She had not been in this house for the best part of 10 years. Mum, stuttered Henry, at the shock. As the shock began to subside, but his pulse continued at an alarming rate. Henry was in two minds. Reach over to give his mother a hug, or have another attempt at unlocking the green door. Keeping his eyes fixed on his mother's face, he instinctively reached for the wedged key. I wouldn't open that door if I was you, she hissed through clenched teeth.
Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. So you've heightened the suspense, Neil, with the arrival of Henry's mother. For everyone tuning in, you can listen to the entire story on the website, which is www.schmoozingpodcast.com. Thank you, Neil, for sharing some of your highs and lows of your remarkable life so far. There is definitely a second episode with you.
Thanks, David.
I am David Hill. This has been Schmoozing. Please don't forget to rate, review, and above all, subscribe. And we will be back next week with show business royalty, none other than the fabulous, or I should say the lovely, Debbie McGee. Stay safe, stay positive, and stay with me for more celebrity schmoozing next week.